Is God a Democrat or a Republican? What I'm going to do in this video is look at the dangers of political parties. Now, to be fair, we're going to look at some of the positive sides of political parties, but we're going to look at mainly the dangers of political parties, why we need to be aware of them, and also talk about voting. What's the best way for a Christian to decide whenever they are in the polling place? How do you pick the right candidate for office? So, with that brief little setup, let's just go ahead and launch right into it. Is God a Democrat or a Republican? Of course, I'm not going to put God in either camp. I don't think that God would align with Democrats or Republicans. It's really a bad question to even ask. And so it's mainly just a way to get you interested in the subject, in talking about political parties. And where do they fit into the Christian worldview? So that's what we're going to look at. Here's what I really think about where God stands on this issue. I'm going to take you back in the Bible to the book of Joshua. This is early in the book of Joshua, where Joshua and the people of Israel have come out of the wilderness. They spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness. Before that, they had come out of Egypt. And now they have just entered into Canaan, also known as the Promised Land. And after they cross the Jordan River, their first objective is to go after Jericho, and they're supposed to conquer Jericho and completely destroy it. Now, you would think at this point it would be pretty easy to predict whose side God is on, because after all, he called Joshua and the people of Israel to go take on Jericho. But let's look at what actually happened. And so here we have a passage from Joshua chapter 5, which is very interesting. Now, just so you know, that is probably not what Joshua looked like in that little image there. It's just that was copyright free, and I kind of like it. So I envision Joshua and the Israelites looking like that, but probably they looked nothing like that. But here's what happened. They crossed the Jordan River. They're headed toward Jericho, and here's what happened next. This is verse 13 of chapter 5 in the book of Joshua. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." So this is either an angel, or it may be a pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. We don't know. It doesn't really matter. Whoever this is in charge of these angel armies. And whose side is he on? He really gives no indication. But then look at the rest of what he says. Well, let's look at what happened first. And so the guy says, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." That's why I kind of think maybe this was a pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, but I'm not really sure. And Joshua did so. So whose side was God on here? Well, that's not really the issue. The issue is not whose side is God on. It's who is on God's side. Joshua was called to holiness here. If you are a person who is striving after holiness, and in fact is a Christian, if you have the imputed holiness of Jesus Christ, you are on God's side. So it's actually improper to ask, whose side is God on? The more proper question to ask is, whose side are you on? So that's the best answer I'm going to give you to whether or not God is a Democrat or a Republican. It's really a false dilemma. I don't think he's on either side. The question is, which individuals, be they Democrats or Republicans, are on God's side? But now with that said, let's do a little foundational work here. First, we need to establish a couple of ideas. What exactly is a political party? Well, before we get to political parties and their definitions, let's start with this. What does it mean to say that you have a political ideology? This is going to be important. Political ideology is this. It's your view about the best form of government and the best economic system. And most people have a political ideology. Now, granted, a lot of people just inherited their political ideology from their parents, but we all have some, at least rudimentary, idea of a political ideology, what we believe is the best kind of government, what's the best economic system. And so that takes us to political parties. What are political parties? Well, let me tell you what they do. Political parties promote their political ideology by winning elections. Let me say that a slightly different way. Political parties gain power to implement their political ideology by winning elections. Winning elections. That is the key to political parties. If you want to know why they do what they do, that is the reason. It is to win elections. Why? So they can promote their political ideology. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Now let's talk about what exactly do political parties do. Some of these you're going to know, some of these you might be surprised about. Probably not. This is pretty common knowledge, fairly straightforward. But I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page here and understand what we're talking about when we say political parties. By the way, there are more political parties than Republicans and Democrats. I hope you know that. There are Libertarians, there's the Green Party, there's a Socialist Workers' Party, there's a Communist Party, there's a Constitution Party. There are a ton of political parties out there. The ones that get the most press tend to be the Republicans and the Democrats. So what do they actually do? Well, probably the main thing that they do is that they nominate candidates for public office. Nominating means to name. You name someone for the office. Now here's what happens in the United States. And I'm going to use presidential elections as my primary means of communicating this. If you go back to 2015, well, no, go back to 2016. 2016, we had primaries and caucuses. What was happening in primaries and caucuses is that people in the political parties were voting for who they wanted their candidate to be. And then by the summer of 2016, we knew that the Democrats had put forward Hillary Clinton. They nominated Hillary Clinton. The Republicans nominated Donald Trump. Why? Because those two candidates got the most votes in the primaries and caucuses. Then what happens is you have campaigning, and then you have an election, and the election is between the candidates who were nominated by the political parties. So that's the way that it works. And that's mainly the role. Now let me add one thing. If you take a party like the Libertarian Party, the Libertarians nominated a guy named Gary Johnson in 2016, but they did not go through the primary and caucus process. Instead, they just kind of voted within their own party and nominated somebody that way. So third parties do not take part in primaries and caucuses. They tend to nominate their candidates a different way. Republicans and Democrats nominate through the candidate who wins the primaries and caucuses. It's an invention. It's not even in the Constitution. It's just a way that has developed over time. So nominating is the main thing. Another thing that parties do is they provide funding for candidates. Now again, as an example, in the primaries and caucuses of 2016, both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump had to do a lot of fundraising. Actually, Trump funded a whole lot of his own campaign. But then when each of these candidates were nominated by their political parties, then they received funding, major funding, from the Democrats and Republicans. So that's one of the things that you get. It's one of the things that you're going to need if you're running for public office, especially the presidency. A third thing that political parties do is campaigning. They help these candidates win. So once they're named, you get funding and you get help. You get strategists who help you know what to do. In the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump had a much better ground game. He was able to win more states because he had better campaigning than Hillary Clinton. Also, rhetorically, he was doing a lot better until right about the end of the campaigning cycle. Just before the election, Hillary Clinton's campaign got a little bit better, started making some headway, but ultimately it wasn't enough for her to win. By the way, she won the popular vote, but she did not win the Electoral College. You win the Electoral College by winning states. So political parties know how to do this. They're very good at campaigning. A fourth thing that you can get from political parties is endorsements. That's what you really want. Hillary Clinton got Barack Obama's endorsement. That was a big deal. He puts his stamp of approval on her. You want the popular politicians in your party to give you their endorsement. President Trump, sometimes he would get endorsements, then some kind of controversy would erupt, and then he would lose that endorsement. So he did get some endorsements. Those tend to be very, very important. Not quite as much for Donald Trump. He kind of goes against a lot of these trends, but that's Donald Trump. And then a fifth thing, and maybe, I don't know, maybe this one is even bigger than nominating. One of the biggest things that political parties do is lend legitimacy to these candidates. In other words, especially for something like the presidency, you're probably not going to win. You probably have no chance at all unless you are affiliated with one of the two main parties. You may not know this, but no third-party candidate has ever won the presidency in the history of the United States. Ever. It has never happened. Teddy Roosevelt got a fair amount of votes, but even he could not come close to getting what he needed in the Electoral College. And so that's why you'll find people tend to run as a Democrat or a Republican. For example, Bernie Sanders, socialist guy, is actually an independent, but he runs as a Democrat because he knows that he will not win the presidency running as an independent. It's just not going to happen because the parties give you legitimacy. So you really need them on your side. All right, so that's basically what they do. Now, let's talk about the benefits of political parties. And I've got benefits in quotation marks because these aren't necessarily benefits. It really depends on who you are and how you view these candidates. One of the benefits of political parties is that they act as watchdogs over one another. In other words, they tell on each other. And if you're paying attention to the news, I'm making this video, it's June 2nd, 2019. What are the Democrats in office constantly doing with regard to Donald Trump? Well, they are reporting on every negative thing he could do. Republicans likewise will report on the opposing party. They'll dig up the dirt. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. They act as watchdogs, and I think that is a great benefit of this. It's a two-party system. You have a choice of more than two, but really it's two main parties. And it's a great benefit. Now, why do they do this? Why do they act as watchdogs? Well, it's because they want to win elections. And if you can make the other guys and girls look bad, then you could win. And so here's one of those great examples where human nature, sinful human nature, actually works in our favor. And so I'm glad. I am glad for this benefit of political parties. A second thing, or a second benefit of political parties, is that they help us to save time when considering political candidates. And today it's incredibly easy. If you want to know about a candidate, simply go to the website of the party they represent and look at the party platform. You can find out what all of these candidates believe. You can find out what the party platform is. Party platform is the candidates stand on issues. And really, you can go from federal to state to local elections, and the political parties will tell you the candidates' views on various issues happening. All right, so they help us to save time, because most of us don't have a lot of time to investigate. And then a third thing, which may be a benefit depending on your point of view. I asked this in class, and some people thought it was a benefit, some people thought it was not a benefit. Political parties have a moderating influence on politics. In other words, we tend to get major candidates who are not extremists one way or the other. They tend not to be too far left, and by left I mean too liberal. Too liberal means you're a socialist. They tend not to be too far right. They tend not to be too conservative. And if you go off the deep end, as a conservative, you're considered a reactionary or a right-winger. And so they tend to be in the middle. And they tend to talk about moderate ideas. Now, why do they do this? Well, it's because the majority of Americans identify politically as moderate. Now, here's the weird thing. Most Americans are registered Republicans or Democrats, but ideologically, when you ask them their opinion on issues, they tend to be moderate. And so in order to get the most votes, you have to have a candidate who is a moderate. Because here's the way it's going to work in every single election. The base of the Democrats and Republicans are always going to vote for their candidate. These are the hardcore party people. You can always count on them to vote for the party. But then you've got this mass of people who are in the middle. And the only way you're going to get to them is that you have to be moderate. All right? So, and we really have had no candidates in a long, long time who you can consider an extremist. I think President Trump probably comes the closest, but really he's a moderate. There are a few issues where he seems to be an extremist, but really he's not. And so that's what you get. And really my poster child for moderate is Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney, one of the biggest flip-floppers in political history. He is a moderate's moderate. And just in case you don't know this, when he ran, well, before he ran against Barack Obama for Obama's second term, Mitt Romney had been the governor of Massachusetts. He was a Republican governor. He actually implemented something very much like Obamacare before he then went on to run against Barack Obama. So Mitt Romney, moderate, really a lightweight liberal in disguise, in my opinion. So that's the benefit. Now, what about this? What about the pitfalls of political parties? What are the negatives? Well, closely related to what I just talked about come some of these pitfalls. First one is this. Political parties tend to compromise or overlook critical issues because they are trying to stay moderate to get the most number of votes. They tend not to deal with hot button issues, things that would be considered hot potato issues. They tend not to deal with them. For example, the whole subject of abortion. You typically will not find candidates talking about this issue very much during the campaigning because it's too divisive. Now again, I will say, President Trump, during his administration, this issue has come to the fore, but it's mainly because of the two Supreme Court justices he nominated, who we think are going to be conservative justices, might overturn Roe versus Wade. And again, Donald Trump is different. He was talking about border wall, border security. That is not a moderate issue. I think a majority of Americans are concerned about it, but neither of the two main parties were talking about it. But here are some things you're never going to hear anybody talk about. You'll never hear anybody talk about the fact that Social Security is bankrupt. And by 2035, the math won't work. And there's no way, unless we just inflate the money supply, that people are going to get Social Security checks. Nobody will talk much about the $19 to $20 trillion national debt that's looming over us, that's going to go way higher with what they call unfunded liabilities, namely pensions that are going to be due in the near future. Another issue that they're not talking about: why do we have our troops parked in more than 100 nations around the world? Why are we involved in funding Saudi Arabia in their war against a country like Yemen? Those are issues that they don't deal with because those aren't moderate issues. And to criticize the military or to say that we need to fix Social Security, well, those are going to be overlooked. Those aren't even going to be talked about because the political parties want to win the elections. Let me give you one more. There's this entity called the Federal Reserve, which controls the money supply. We have a constant inflationary money supply because of the Federal Reserve. Your money is losing value all the time, so that you have to risk in mutual funds, the stock market, whatever. because we have this inflationary money supply. Nobody's talking about it, but it's one of the things that screws our lives up more than anything else. Federal Reserve makes your eyes glaze over just to have me say it. So they won't talk about these issues. Another pitfall, and these two really go together. Political parties entice us to put our brains in neutral. They can also lead us to turn a blind eye to the character of candidates. See, here's the way human bodies work. Our brains consume an enormous amount of energy. In fact, it of all the organs in our body produces or consumes more energy than all of the others. And so our body is constantly trying to preserve energy. And what our brains want to do is really fly on autopilot as much as possible. And so political parties, I think, unwittingly play on our physiology. And they give us a way to not really think about issues. They give us a way to not really think about candidates. They give us a way to not really consider the long-term negative or positives to particular stances on issues. And instead, we just trust what the party says. And really, think about how this is working on us. Political parties really they're not putting forward people with the best character or necessarily the best ideas. They are putting forward people who have the best chance of winning. That is the top value. And so what happens for people who put their trust in political parties is that you get a distorted picture of reality. You get the values of the political party. And what is the top value of the political party? It's to win the election. And so what you get into is this kind of group think, where you'll go to war about particular issues, but then not look at the big picture to see if that's even what you should be an issue to fight about. And so where does that take us? Well, where it takes us is to the view in politics, not discovered by Machiavelli, but certainly promoted in his book The Prince. It's the view that the ends justify the means. And so in the case of political parties, the ends are to win elections. And so you win by any means necessary. And that's where we are in the United States. And it's not like this has suddenly occurred. All right, we've had political parties not quite from the beginning, but really since at least George Washington's second term. We've had political parties, and this has been the trend. The ends justify the means. Park your brains behind the door. And that's why you need to be really, really careful of political parties. I'm not saying they're completely untrustworthy, but don't let them cause you to stop thinking. And so with that, let's turn to one final issue here. Godly voting, or abstaining. I want you as a Christian to be able to vote in a way that pleases God. And sometimes what that will mean for you is abstaining. It means not voting for any candidate. It's completely ridiculous to say if you don't vote, you can't complain. There have been times when I have not voted for particular candidates or for particular offices if I thought nobody was a suitable candidate. And you know what I say? If somebody says to me, if you don't vote, you can't complain, I follow up with a question. Who says? Really, I mean, how does that follow? That's totally ridiculous. Because look, I didn't vote for that candidate, and I'm complaining. Who's stopping me? Nobody. So that's ridiculous. But how do you do it? If you're going to vote, how do you decide on a candidate? And I'm using these two prime examples. You know, in 2016, I asked my students, how did we arrive at a place where our two viable options are Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton? Couldn't believe it. Now, so how do you vote? Well, I've got three simple things that you can do. The first one is to put character first. Start by looking at their character. Despite what Bill Clinton's campaign said back in the 90s, it's the economy, stupid. Character does matter. And a lot of people will say that it does not matter. We don't elect a pastor after all. We're electing a president. That's ridiculous. Character matters. because the decisions they make will be based on their character. And then the second thing is their competence. And really, competence means, do they have the qualifications for this? Do they have the ability to lead? Can they take us in the right direction as a country? But let me add with that, I really don't want a president with a vision for the country. I don't want him going after a vision for the country. I want him following the Constitution. And the Constitution would limit the president's role to a great degree, not be this visionary leader. If you want to see a president who really got it right, for the most part, go back to the 1920s and look at Calvin Coolidge. There you'll see a president. Or maybe go back a few decades before that. Look at Grover Cleveland. And there you'll see presidents actually following the Constitution. Sorry, that's a rabbit trail. You got to look at character and competence. And here's how I know this. In Exodus 18, we have an incident where Moses was trying to lead Israel, and he was being worn out trying to lead them because he was the only leader. And so his father-in-law said, no, what you need to do is appoint some people to help you. And so here is a biblical principle that I think can help us whenever we are thinking about who we're going to vote for. Yes, I am completely ripping this out of context, but I think we can apply the principle. And so here's the instruction given to Moses for who should be leaders. Moreover, look for able men, that's competence, from all the people, men who fear God, that is, they have a reverential respect, they don't violate His law, or I should say they seek to uphold it, they're trustworthy, and they hate a bribe. And then he says to place such people as chiefs over, and so what you get here is a little hierarchy, with Moses being the final appeal in this hierarchy of Israel. And so there you have it. This is what we are to look for. Able men, they fear God, they're trustworthy, that is, they follow through, they do what they say they're going to do, and they hate a bribe. Now I realize that fourth one, you just about can't find that anymore because they're all essentially bribed these days. That's why I have a third point in just a second. I do want to point out one thing about this verse. If we tried to live out this verse, it would be nearly impossible at the federal level and really difficult at the state level. But it would be very possible at the local level, wouldn't it? Because you have more of a chance of knowing who these people are. And I think this is at least an indirect way of pointing us to the idea that government primarily should be local. Not this massive entity, this massive hierarchy that we have in place today, which pretty much ensures that everybody's dissatisfied and that everybody is being unjustly treated. But, sorry, that's a little rabbit trail. But you need to look at character first, and then competence. And then, barring that, consider their stance on the issues. And unfortunately, and I'll just speak for myself, unfortunately, in the presidential election of 2016, I couldn't completely trust either candidate and their character. They're both morally reprehensible in their own way. Competence, okay, Mrs. Clinton was fairly competent politically, but do I want somebody who's slick politically? No thank you. Mr. Trump, competent as a businessman. That gave him a little bit more of an edge. But really for me it was their stance on the issues. I agreed more with Donald Trump than with Hillary Clinton. And that's just a fact. And I'll add this, and this might lead you to another video coming up in the not too distant future. For me as a Christian, I will never, ever vote for a pro-choice candidate. My view is that if you can't figure out the value of the most vulnerable people in our society, namely the unborn, then you have no business wielding power. If you've got the power of life and death, and you can't figure out that the unborn should not be murdered, if you can't figure that basic one out, you're not going to get my vote. And so Hillary Clinton was never going to get my vote. Trump, frankly, I waffled on. And I'll just say up front, yeah, I voted for him. I wasn't terribly happy about my choice, but that's what we had to choose from. And in the end, it was his stance on issues. And in particular, it's because I knew that he was going to nominate conservative Supreme Court justices. And that has turned out to be a good thing. He actually kept his word with that one. And I'm hoping that we're going to see good things from that Supreme Court. So, character first, then competence, then consider their stance on issues. And please do look at their stances on issues and think about the long-term results if they can implement their policy on various issues. Okay, that's going to do it for this video. So in the next segment or in the class next week, we're going to talk about this one. Should Christians support the death penalty? Come to class. See you then.